Oh, there. Oh,
Okay.
good. Okay, great. Oh my gosh, thank you everyone for coming. It's 12:01. Everyone is on their way. I'm putting my water here because it's easy to get to. Thank you so much, Susie. So I think should we get started?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's do it. So I want to welcome everyone to Interiors Academy. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you very much to Suzanne Slesin for joining us today. Susie is the publisher and editorial director and founder of Pointed Leaf Press, where she publishes, I think, the most inventive, layered, creative design books on the market. Susie was a founding editor and reporter at the New York Times Home section. She worked at the U.S. edition of House and Garden, where she was my boss. And at Home Style, she was my boss. A great boss.
That was a while ago.
That was a while ago. And a fun time it was. And at Home Style, at Oh at Home, and even before starting her own press, Susie published sort of countless books. So you're always curious, but we are curious about you and your career, what makes a great story, a great book, and a great career. So let's get to it. The first thing I wanted to ask you, I may have to shut the door. One moment. I'll be right back. The door is swinging around. Okay, I'm back. So I wanted to say, you've written hundreds of stories for newspapers, magazines, and I wanted to know if there are you can pick out 3 highlights or turning points in your career to talk to us about.
Well, I've always been interested in stories. I started my career basically as an art historian. I never thought I would be a writer, and I was sort of shoved into the writing, editing sphere by first at New York Magazine, where we did lots of interesting things like develop kinds of stories about design that did not exist. For example, we told people what's the best thing to buy for $50 for $100. And I think that was the beginning of getting design and design secrets out of a very secret world and letting the consumer in. So that is really what my goal in most of my jobs has been, is to include people and have them connect with us and the stories and the people we interviewed. So I must say that that moment in New York Magazine was a very important moment. But I was really happy to be working at the time with Joan Crone. And we went on to do High Tech, which was 40 years ago, nearly
Wow.
41 years ago. And that was really a milestone in my life. And I think that we just fed it these 40 years and we can't realize it's 40 years. And we have so many people who reacted to it and who remembered the story of High Tech and how it's still relevant today. Anyway, those are 2 things. The style books, where we traveled all over the world, seem millions of years away. And I worked with a team with Danielle in Paris, with Stafford in London. And we really started something that I think became very important for other journalists, which was the authenticity of people's houses. Going into people's houses, not necessarily decorated houses, but traveling and seeing what were the trends and how did people really live in different countries. When I went to the Times, I was lucky enough to be at the home section at a time when it was very important and powerful. And whoever you wrote up, it really helped them develop their careers. And I loved being a reporter. And one of the things that I was very happy about was that I introduced Ian Schrager to both Andre Putman and Philippe Stark. And the rest is really history in boutique hotels. And my payoff, so to speak, was I was the first one to get the scoop and to write it up. And that was really important. It's really important for journalists to be there first and to keep their eyes open and to know when something is happening that's important.
I think it's interesting because you always said you don't set trends, but you reported on them. But in
Absolutely.
doing that, I think there was great influence.
There was. And, you know, it was a time when I never did not answer a phone call. It was before emails, but people would call up with the most crazy things, and you'd pick up your handbag and go out the door. And it was fun. That's how I did the first stories on Harlem, people living in Harlem, which led to the Harlem house tours. Uh, every time that I left the house, I would not go straight to work. I would make a stop, go see somebody's apartment, go interview somebody, go look at a new product. And I still think that that was really important at the time. And there are people today who say, oh my God, I met you 30 years ago and you helped me get my product out there. It was a really different time. It was a different time, but it was fun.
It was fun and it was exciting. And I think that still those lessons we have to remember. And now that we're all at home, remember even more how important and interesting it is to get out there, see things, and answer every phone call we can, if we
or
can.
Email.
Or email. So then after that, you started Pointed Leaf Press. And I wanted to talk about why and how you came to that decision to start your own publishing.
At the time, in about 2001, I believe, I was working at Homestyle magazine. I was finally an editor-in-chief, having been number 2, number 3 for many years. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And I brought with me wonderful people who I'd known before. And anyway, the magazine was a success, but it folded anyway. And everybody got very good severances. And for the first time in 25 years, I didn't have a job and I really didn't know what to do. So I had lunch with a friend of mine, and she said, why don't you just do that book that you've always been talking about Helena Rubinstein? Now, to be completely forthright, Helena Rubinstein was my stepfather's mother. So my mother, who had been widowed 3 times, married Roy Valentine Titus, who was her son, her oldest son, in 1960, and she became my step-grandmother. And I didn't know her very long. She died 4 years later, but I was very impressed by her personality and her homes, her various homes that I was lucky enough to go to. And I think that I never forgot it. Anyway, my friend said, why don't you just do this book? And I had collected a lot of visual materials, and I had this idea to do a visual biography because I didn't want to write 60 or 70,000 words or whatever it was. And I had no idea how to produce a book, although I knew how to create a book. So my husband said, just print it yourself, have it printed yourself. So after I sent it out to various people and I didn't get great response. So I called a printer and he said, of course I'll print the book. Wow. So we produced the book. Stafford designed it, Stafford Cliff in London. I collected all the materials and I became a publisher with 1 book. But I have to thank Dan Shaw, who I think is listening in.
Right here. Hi, Dan.
Hi, Dan. The biggest problem I had was what to call the book, because I knew. And so Dan came over and we were sort of talking. And he said, well, you know, it's all about chutzpah, which it was. And that's what appealed to me, was this woman's incredible boldness and how she was different and everything else. I said, well, I don't think we could put a Yiddish word on the cover of this book, but what else could it be? And it became over the top. And I think that many books I've done since could be over the top, but she was really over the top. And I think that experience of the way she approached life was very influential for me in the way I looked at interior design and designers ever since. And I was always drawn to the extremes. I was always drawn to news. I was always drawn to people who did original things that didn't fit into the regular mold. I mean, we wrote up in the 80s, we wrote up Michael Formica's tattered, torn window curtains. And we got criticized by in an op-ed piece at the New York Times. But it was fantastic because he was doing something very different, showing the element of time in decorating, and nothing was always perfect. And I was always drawn to that. And then I became more interested in the talents of interior designers and what they did to transform people's lives. And I've always been very beholden to them, and I've always admired interior design. And that's how really I built my career, by looking for people who were original, who were not afraid, and who did things really outside the box.
Mm-hmm. And I think that that book, Over the Top, sort of pulls out two things that make what you do a bit different in terms of the way you put books together. First is sort of identifying the nut of that story, chutzpah, over the top, like just let's name this thing simply. Here's what it is, here's your story, and then going with it. And then the other thing is that the book was incredibly layered and had these beautiful interiors, incredibly daring. I mean, we could go down that rabbit hole of Dolly and all of that, but we're not going to. She was incredibly daring, and you created a narrative that was incredibly layered and reflected the complexity of her life and the material that you had. So I think that's one of the things that kind of distinguishes a Pointed Leaf Press book, but I wonder if you could speak to that. What makes what you do different, or what is it that you're doing at Pointed Leaf Press?
Well, I think I'm very lucky in that after it seemed that my career as a journalist or a magazine editor was more or less over, that I found something to do that was related and went one step further. So when I started doing books, first of all, they are all visual biographies. Even if they only show designers' rooms, those rooms portray who he is, even if he's working for a client, he or she is, even if they're working for a client. And that has always been what Pointed Leaf Press is about. I was very lucky to feel that what was important was to tell people's personal stories and how they got to be who they were today, or who they are. And that means, where did they grow up? What were they inspired by? What was their education? What do they like? How do they deal with people they meet? And we started from the first book we did, the interior design book, we put in people's personal photographs. Sometimes I had to fight to get them. You know? But many people, and I'm very lucky, I first started working with Stafford Cliff, and now for the past 8 years, I work with Federico Farina, who's an extraordinary creative director. And he and I, and now we have a third person who's a managing editor, the three of us really work very, very closely with our authors. We ask them their opinion on everything from the weight of the paper to which photographs they want to use, how they want to be portrayed. And then we go with that and we tell their story. And it's nobody else's story. So that's why we're very proud that every book is different. We start from scratch with every book, and we learn everything we need to know about our authors. Mm-hmm. And we hope we help them tell their story.
I think it's interesting because each one really is so different. So more people, you said more people are coming to you now than ever to do books. What do you tell them? What are the first steps, and what does it take to publish that book?
Well, it depends. We do two kinds of books. We do the books that Federico allows me to do, which are sort of my crazy ideas about things I just love. And I have a friend in Paris, Danielle Rosa-Strock, who's a great collector. And I've done a number of books on his collections. He worked with me on all the style books. I understand him very well. He's an incredible trend. If anybody in the world knows where the world is going in design, he has an inkling for it. He calls it faint signals, but he captures them. Anyway, we've done a number of books. He's a crazy collector. He has 2,000 spoons, millions of other things. But that's only part of what we do. What we really do now are custom books for interior designers, which are which designers have different reasons for doing. Either they want to extend their careers into licensing, into different hospitality, into other areas that they haven't worked with, or they want to look back on their careers and have a record of what that is. And so these are basically custom books, which they participate in both financially, emotionally, time-wise, and we work together to find out what they're going to use the book for and how they're going to use it. And those books really become marketing tools. They're not, yes, they're distributed. They're in all the bookstores that we sell to, and particularly non-bookstores, which are a great source for finding design books now, and probably will be the only source, because bookstores are dinosaurs right now mostly because of Amazon, but our books are on Amazon. But also that it gives them a way to get their book in front of people who might be interested in their services. And that's really what it's about. So they have to also participate in getting the book out. If they have showrooms, they have to do events. We help them with it. And, many of them hire publicists, which I highly recommend. We used to do a lot of that. We don't anymore. And publicists can really manage their careers using the book as the entree to both publications, bloggers, events, showrooms, whatever. It's really an object. And we like our objects to be not buried in the bookshelves, but out on the table and be looked at over and over again.
And I think,
yeah,
I
I'm
was
sorry.
going to say, well, it's interesting because you have to really make the book work for you once it's produced. But in order to produce it, I think what's interesting too is that you do approach each one individually. Each story is its own story, and therefore each object is its own object related to that. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that too, because the size and shape and look of your books changes a lot more than some people.
Well, I think Federico could explain that better. But for example, we've done books at different formats. I mean, we had this idea one year to do books that were more inexpensive and then would have a wider audience. That is not actually proven to be true, because people who want design books want design books. They don't really care if it's $45 or $65. If they want the book, they'll buy the book. And many designers have themselves helped us do what they feel represents them. One of our bestsellers of all time was the book we did last year or 2 years ago now on Carrie Joyce. And actually, we started out as a fairly large book, and halfway through, Federico said, the pictures are so incredible, we should really make this a much bigger book. And got in touch with Carrie. Of course, there was a cost factor in it. Carrie went along with it. And this is a big book. It's, now I can't remember exactly the size, but we thought, Carrie Joyce is not a household name, but the book was beautiful. The cover was a linen printed in one of his textile patterns. And we have not been able to keep that book in stock. People love that book. And I think that it depends also what the designer wants to get out of it. I think we don't want to do the books as big as the Helmut Newton books that Taschen did. But it depends if it's a book that you're going to refer to that's in your office or your home, or it's a book that you're going to sit down and read cover to cover when you're sitting in a chair. That has a lot to do with it. But also the work itself has sort of commands a bigger book or a smaller book. And everyone is different. But we like a big book that's big enough to have an effect. We like the covers to be striking and to be different. And we hope that people will appreciate the content, because we work very hard in a time when people say people don't read. But as we've all noticed, people are reading more now that they're at home, that it's very important for the content to be as strong and legitimate as the visuals. So that's what we do.
And the size and the beauty sort of adds to the emotional connection and the engagement of the audience, I think. And Dan also mentioned, because I'm reading the comments, that these books become sort of a document of design history, which brings us to the element of time. So books take time to make them, time to read them, time to absorb them.
Correct. We are only 3, and we do not overload ourselves. I mean, we do about 10 books a year, and we can we can do a book. If somebody asks us to do a book now, we could get that book out for next year.
Mhm.
We don't have a waiting list, a backlog, agreements with printers, or any. We could do what we want. And I think that's the part of my little company that I've loved the best. I mean, after working for 30 years in corporate America, I don't have, I have to ask Federico and I ask my managing editor, Marjorie, I ask their opinion and I respect their opinions. But if I want to do something crazy and I really want to do it now, drop everything else, we want to do this now, we can do it. Some people are more demanding, they really want to have their book out for next spring. So we say, well, this is what you have to deliver. This is what you have to give us, and we'll do it. And we've done books in 8 months.
That's
from beginning to end.
And so too, what you want, oh my gosh, Russell's coming in, the hamster's in, and both dogs are in now. So, I don't know. We might descend into chaos, we may not. But I think that, sorry, I just got derailed. But I was going to say, so you do very innovative things, whether you're working with the designers or on your own. So I wanted to talk first about the Lee Skolnick book you just came out with, and then also maybe one of the books that's sort of one of your own crazy ideas that you just had to do.
Oh, well.
Or not so crazy.
I could get, I should show you the Lee Skolnick book. Wait 1 second.
It's quite amazing. Oh, look at Susie's bookshelves. Amazing. At some point, I think I have to ask Susie also about her old apartment and her new apartment, because she's moved from uptown to downtown, and it's been a very interesting part of the year.
So here's the Lee Skolnick book. It has 2 covers. His Lee Skolnick Private, and then Lee Skolnick Public. But I can't show you very well, but it's a book like on an infinite loop. So you go through the book and you get in the middle. It's hard to show you. And then you start it again.
Wow.
You start like that. You go through the different projects. Then it turns around and you start again. So this came out of, we had many years ago, somebody had showed me a small dummy of a book that was about LA night and day. And I always wanted to find an architect or designer who loved this idea. And Lee Skolnick, who's a wonderful architect who I've known for many years, his work was very, he had equal amount of work residentially and commercially. And that was perfect for this kind of book, because his commercial work and his interiors work, his residential work have many similarities. And we thought that if we showed one after the other, it would be very confusing and it wouldn't pay justice to either exercise. So they went along with it, and this is the first copy. I'm seeing it yesterday, but I think it's very exciting and it's just fun. And we don't know how it's going to look on Amazon because they're going to choose one cover.
Modern problems.
But I love the idea of people having to interact with it and understand that it's more than just flipping the pages and putting it down. They have to really get into it and understand what the relationship is. Lee wrote a wonderful piece for it. He wrote the whole book, actually. Paul Goldberger wrote a wonderful piece. So I think that it's a very unusual architecture book.
That's interesting. Oh, Dan wants to know about the work that Lee did for you in Bridgehampton.
Oh, well, he did a wonderful edition, Our House, but it's in the book. Unfortunately, we sold it years ago and it's been torn down and we're crying. I won't go down the street anymore.
Oh my gosh.
It doesn't exist anymore. The only thing that exists is what's in the book here.
That's amazing.
Oh, it was a wonderful house.
That's a wonderful house. And I want to get back to your houses, but I also wanted to say that it's interesting because I think you can't do that kind of book unless you have a really strong collaboration with your art director, with your designer.
Absolutely.
And you've had very long-standing relationships with the art directors you've worked with.
I've always loved to work with art directors. At the New York Times, my relationship was with the art director at the home section. And that was my pleasure, basically,
Mm-hmm.
of working with, first of all, I don't like to do anything by myself. I'm not a good lone worker. And I love to work with art directors who do magical things. And my longest relationship was with a designer in London called Stafford Cliff. And we worked together on all the style books. He did a lot of books for me when I was starting out. And now I have a very close relationship with Federico. And he did not come from the interior design world at all. And he's learned a lot. And he's one of the few art directors who reads what people write and he listens and responds to it. So it's very exciting for me to work with him. And I love working with him. And we fight and we disagree on things and we come to some arrangement. And he is the most patient, I'm not a patient person. He's a very patient person and he holds these designers' hands and nothing is ever too much. You want to change. One architect we worked with, Alan Wansenberg, we were doing a big book the size of the Skolnick book with him. And one day he came into the office and he said, no, I don't want that size. I want a book that fits into my backpack.
Oh.
I said, really? We've
Him
finished
with
this
his
book.
backpack.
It was a normal backpack. So I think Stafford was working on it. So we shrunk the book. It's the first time in my life I've shrunk the book. And to this day, I think it was a mistake because he had photographs by William Abranowitz. It was incredible photographs. But that's what he wanted. And that was his dream, that you could pull the book out of your knapsack while you were on the subway and read about it. Anyway, we did it, and he was very happy, and that was the main thing. So we're flexible.
It's amazing. But those big, beautiful photographs are one of the things that draw people into your books. And you have these big photographs, and you really make the most of them across spreads, and then you also combine longer shots with details. And I think that's one of the interesting things that books can do now. At a time when we may or may not be able to see things in person, they really bring you to the place, and your books really bring you to the place. Inspiring. Oh,
but photographing details was something that we started when we did we started in the 80s when we did French style, and Jacques Durand, who's no longer with us, was a fantastic interiors photographer, and he had done a lot of photography. And when we looked at Staff and I looked at his pictures, we thought, oh my God, the details, we never seen details before, because most of the photography you saw about interiors was big 3/4 shots with distorted lenses, and you never got a sense of the materials, of the details, of the light, and he only worked in natural light. And he was very widely published in the United States after we did the book, a lot of things from the book. And I've always remembered the photographs that we loved from that book. And any designer that we work with, I always go back to the detail, the telling detail that captures people when they open the book. And then you want to see the big room. And we work very hard in these books to have no small pictures and to have pictures that go together on a spread. Each spread is its own little world. And that's very important for the overall feeling and graphic presence of the book.
Mm-hmm. You really create a world. It's really fun. And I think one of the things is with the details, because you're such a big collector, and I think that focusing on the details has kind of dovetailed with your interest in collecting and documenting how collectors live.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Sort of, yeah.
Sort of.
I'm less of a collector. I'm now in my de-accession phase, slightly, not seriously yet, but I'm trying to be in my de-accession phase. But I have loved collecting crazy things, because many years ago, Danielle used to come to New York to work on the style books, and we just went out to flea markets and looked at things, and he would pick up a rusted piece of metal, and suddenly we were doing a book on wire objects, and there was a whole history of wire objects that went from Mittel Europa to Pennsylvania to everything. And that was very influential for me, that somebody could make a history and make a collection out of something you picked up off the ground. I am not that person. I have to be shoved a little bit in that direction. But it was really fun to go to flea markets and antique shows and look for things. And they were not expensive things. They were just, we love ordinary things. We love, I started collecting this pottery by a French potter from Valoris, who was a neighbor of Picasso's. Picot, his name was Robert Picot. And out of my collecting a couple of small vases in the Paris flea market, I spoke to my friend Sylvie Vautier about it. She says, "Oh my God, I know all about it. He had a relationship with Picasso. I would like to do a book on that." And from that, she found his daughter. We did a whole book called Picasso, Picot, Picot, Picasso, which is not only about this collection, the collection of his daughter and what he did, but it's about a whole period in French history, which was when Picasso went down to the south of France. So that was a thrilling experience. I can't say the book was a huge success. It has a very limited audience. I still love it, but I love the fact that you start with something very random and you can develop it into a whole story.
It's amazing.
That has something to do with our culture.
And that's why it's also a different story than anybody else has told. So I also wanted to ask you about how you live, because you mentioned collecting, and I think how you live has changed. You were before now, or sometime before now, uptown in this classic Park Avenue apartment that still shows up, sometimes unattributed, on Instagram feeds, where you have that incredible library dining room.
Oh, my favorite room.
It was the best room ever, really. And I think, again, so influential. It was a very unusual thing at the time to have someone create a room that was meant for more than one use, but and name it. And since then you've moved downtown. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about how you made that move and what it's meant for you.
Well, my husband, Michael Steinberg, was an art dealer. He says he lived on Park Avenue because our kids grew up there. My mother was a few blocks away. They went to school in the neighborhood. But his dream was always to move downtown. I mean, to move to the more where it was more his thing. And we were lucky. We had this very large wreck of an apartment that we more or less redesigned. And when we moved in, we thought, we'll never fill this place up. It's way too big, even for us. And we had so much stuff in it. By the time we moved, it was filled and we loved it. I mean, I'll never love an apartment as much as I love that apartment. I really thought my daughter will grow up and get married here. None of that happened. I mean, there was the financial questions. And then when our kids grew up and left home, we were the two of us in this large apartment. And many of our friends who were in the same situation were renovating. You know, they took the son's room, became a gym. The daughter's room became a spa, I don't know, a dressing room. And we decided, no, we're moving downtown. And we did. And we moved to a very out of fashion neighborhood at the time, which is Chinatown and Little Italy, between Chinatown and Little Italy, because it was a great deal cheaper than Soho and Tribeca. And of course, I was writing a real estate column for the Times at the time, and I was going to see new developments. And I found this one, which was the stable to the police building downtown. It was where they kept the horses for the mounted policemen. And then it became something crazy called the Machinery Exchange. And it was a fantastic building that had been completely renovated by a young architect. And there was a penthouse that was going to be built. So I called Michael and I said, okay, I'll move for this. I'll move if we can move here. And we did. And it was a time when the developer gave us a very good deal. And we moved. Well, it took us a year to move because the building wasn't finished. And we've loved being there. And now we're contemplating what's our next move. And I don't know what that is. But we moved some of our collections. We got rid of a lot of things. and Michael moved his art. He moved his art, I moved my junk. And, and it's really a fabulous loft. It happens to be a duplex, which does not portend well for my knee situation. So I think that in the next few years, we're going to be looking around to move again. But it turned out to be a fantastic neighborhood. It's a very diverse, lively neighborhood. We love being downtown. Michael is very happy, which is very important to me. And I still go uptown. I used to still go uptown practically every day because old habits die hard. And but I don't think I regret it less and less. It's been 11 years. It's been 11 years.
Has it really? We all have good memories of that. And I see Lucy, who's your daughter, asking me to ask you about the yard sale on Park Avenue.
Oh,
and
that was hysterical.
With that, it was great. Oh my God.
We decided we had a lot of things, you know, I had inherited, my mother had died, and I inherited a lot of things from her, like linens for dining tables at C24. I don't know what, you know, she had a Park Avenue apartment. She lived in the same apartment for 50 years on Park Avenue, a few blocks away. I had a lot of things that really we weren't going to move with. And so we decided to have a yard sale, and someone suggested we have it on the medians in Central Park. And I thought that was not a good idea, but we decided to have it in our apartment. So we labeled everything. We sent out a card, and people came, and it was really hilarious. So we put prices on it, and your best friend would come up to you and say, pick up something and say, $10 for this? Are you crazy? Will you take 5? It was an out-of-body experience. But we did sell a lot of things, and you know, things that you really don't need anymore. Mm-hmm. You know, extra dishes. I can't even remember. Jewelry, you know, costume jewelry. But it was mostly books. We sold a lot of books. We sold just a lot of things. I collected a lot of things. And it was fun.
I was going to say, a lot of people are saying that their favorite things came from that sale. So I think it's great because every time you move, your things become someone else's things, become memories for someone else, and makes them very happy. So I think everybody's here right now is probably looking forward to your next move. Because even though you de-accessioned a lot, I think there's still some stuff in there that's pretty great.
There are some things. Thank goodness we have this tiny house in Sag Harbor, which has a huge basement. So whenever I think, am I ready to part with this? I'm really not quite ready. I sneak it out to the country and I put it in the basement. Okay. It'll resurface someday. But I'm really not collecting as much as I used to at all. No.
But it's nice because the books we have, so it's like the books allow everyone to experience the things, the places, and the things of the places again and again. So I was like, I could talk to you forever, but we shouldn't do that because, you know, people have other things too. And but maybe we'll come back and do another one because this was very interesting.
Thank you so much, Sabine.
Thank you. And I would encourage everyone. So we didn't really talk about where you buy the books, but that's something very interesting to get into at some point. But one place you can get them is Susie's website, pointedleafpress.com, and see them there.
We get very good service, and we have sales right now. And you could. There's enough information for you to get an idea of what the book is about, which is what we'd like you to do.
Yeah, and beautiful. I think even on the website, it's funny, the pictures in the book need to be beautiful, the pictures of the book need to be beautiful, and that really is what draws this crowd in, I think. And you do such a good job of it. So thank you, Susie. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Anything else? Any last words for us? No. Okay. Bye. Love you. Thank you.
Love you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.